Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to continue to talk about the Kristin Smart court case in respect of the week commencing the 1st of August 2022. As a reminder, Kristin Smart, a Cal Poly freshman, went missing 26 years ago, and last year Paul and Ruben Flores were arrested in connection with her murder. Paul has been accused of her murder and his father Ruben accused of helping Paul cover up the crime. Now, as an aside before we start, apparently jurors can hand a note to the bailiff at any point to request clarification from a witness. The judge and the attorneys then review these notes in chambers and choose which questions to ask a witness at their own discretion. So let's get to it. The first witness of the week appeared on Monday morning and was District Attorney Investigator J.T. Camp. Camp had taken photos of the Crandall Way house in 2021, and that's where the party was held on the night that Kristin went missing. And there was some time spent with him going through the pictures to give the jurors a feel for what the layout was of the final party she attended and the general location outside the building. Also, he went through the locations of the Cal Poly dorm areas, which he also took pictures of. Now, I've already covered the final trip that Kristin took on that night before she was last seen, and to give you a feel for this, here's the Crandall Way house location of the party, and here is the route taken back by Kristin, Paul and Cheryl, before Cheryl then departed towards her dorm, leaving Paul and Kristin alone. On cross, Camp was asked by Sanger why he didn't investigate other suspects and took no steps to exonerate Paul Flores. And Sanger accused him of taking the pictures of Crandall Way, in quotes, to help the prosecution tell a story. We then have the next witness, Crystal Teschendorf. She was another Cal Poly freshman and Kristin Smart's roommate in room 120 Muir Hall. She last saw Kristin on the Friday evening of May the 24th, 1996, when they left for different parties. Kristin was wearing tennis shoes, surf shorts and a grey t-shirt, but she didn't take her key or red backpack. When Crystal returned to her room on Saturday morning, the key and backpack were still there where they were left on the Friday. Now, she'd stayed in another dorm with her boyfriend that night, while her friend Jana stayed in room 120. Now, as an aside, Jana has said that Kristin never returned to the room at any point during that night. Now, Crystal says that she and other women from Muir Hall discussed other possibilities for why Kristin might not have returned, before they started to feel less and less easy the longer she was gone. The women then called the police on Sunday, May the 26th, but the police wouldn't take a report. Again, they called the police when Kristin didn't show up for classes on Tuesday, May the 28th. Crystal's concern level by that point was, in quotes, very, very high. She had never done anything like that when she lived with me. It was very out of character for her. Sanger, on cross, asked if her boyfriend Dustin was friends with a man called Ted, and did Ted come into the room that night? I'm sure he did. He came all the time. We were friends, she replied. Now, at this stage, I think Sanger is introducing additional people that did or could have been in or around Kristin's room or dorm to lay out possibilities that other people, and not just Paul, could have had the opportunity to abduct Kristin that night. So back to the testimony. Did Kristin drink alcohol before they left the dorm? No, none of them did, was the answer. What would happen if your boyfriend slept in your dorm that night? Kristin would normally stay in Margarita's room next door. You had all arranged different sleeping arrangements that night, she was asked, and on response said that it was only she and Jana who had. Steve Fleming was called to the stand next. He was a basketball player and formed a friendship and a bond with Kristin, as they were both tall. He also lived in Muir Hall, but on the 3rd floor, but in the same wing as Kristin. He got quite emotional when looking at a picture of Kristin that Puvril for the prosecution gave him to look at to confirm if it was her, holding a tissue to his eyes at one point. He'd seen Paul Flores in the Muir Hall common areas, even though Paul didn't live there and didn't seem to have any friends there either. He'd thought that Paul was kind of like following Kristin, as he put it. He saw him once alone sitting in the study area of Muir Hall with no books. It was odd. Like, you don't live in this dorm. He was just around, Steve said. On another occasion, on his way to play basketball, he'd seen Kristin's door open and Paul was stood a few feet inside the door. Kristin was back by where the desks were, he said. She was not okay with it, he said, of her body language. Puvril asks if Paul Flores was memorable. Steve said he was because the girls in the dorm would tell me he made them uncomfortable. Puvril also asked Steve if he ever saw Paul Flores in Muir Hall again after Kristin Smart went missing. He says he did not. Sanger on cross tried to poke holes in the order of Steve's recollection. Did he recollect saying, "That guy was a fucking creep, he was a creeper"? He did. But you only knew who he was because his name was all over the news. I knew him because women told me they were uncomfortable, but after he was all over the news. Before that, he replied. In the morning after this, when Steve got back on the stand, Sanger said to him, "So you didn't know Paul Flores' name until after the publicity?" Steve said, "No, I did. The same way that people knew me, like, that's Steve from the basketball team. People around the dorms knew, that's Paul, he's the creepy guy." In my opinion, this line of questioning seems to be backfiring on Sanger. But yet again he tried. "You didn't know Paul Flores at all, did you?" And Steve responded, "I knew of him because women told me he made them feel uncomfortable before Kristin went missing." Sanger said, "Who?" Well, Steve responds, "Hannah, who played tennis at the Cal Poly, drove a BMW, and Kayla, and gave names out to support this." Now Sanger needs to hold off on this line. He's just reinforcing a very negative picture of his client. But no, he doesn't. He continues. "You talked to them before Kristin Smart went missing?" Steve responds, "Yes." And again, "So after the publicity in the case, you had conversations with these women about Paul Flores?" And Steve responds, "I answered that before. It was before there was any publicity." Sanger really isn't helping himself. So then we had Misik asking Steve why he didn't come forward in May or June of 1996, and Steve said, "Do you see me? I come from East Oakland. I'm African American. I was taught to be scared of the police," which is ironic because I then became a police officer later. Now the tone grew very heated as Sanger then asked Steve how he could possibly have avoided the national publicity. "As soon as I graduated, I went to war. I tried to move on. My life went in a very different route. I had to focus on what was in front of me." And the reference to going to war was because Steve joined the military shortly after graduating. So Sanger asks Steve why he never came forward to law enforcement again after he spoke to the FBI in 1999, and Steve responds, "I don't know. I guess I was a shitty friend." We then had a juror question, and this was about the time that he saw Paul in Kristin's room. "Did she notice you or give you a sign that she was uncomfortable?" And Steve says he can't recall if she looked at him or waved, but he could tell that she was uncomfortable just from her body language. Matthew Toomey, or Matt, was called next, another Cal Poly freshman who attended the party with his roommate Ross. He'd seen Kristin at about 10 p.m. when she introduced herself as Roxy. Paul Flores then walked up to him and asked him how he knew Kristin. Paul had said something like she was hot or she was good looking. He was definitely interested in her, Matt said. When they left around midnight, he remembers seeing Kristin lying on the lawn next to the house and her eyes were closed. They offered to walk her home, but she said she was fine, although her voice was somewhat slurred. Matt, on cross-examination by Sanger, said that he'd told this story to a PI in 1998 and then was asked, "Is there some reason you refused to speak to our defence investigator when she contacted you?" Matt says he just didn't want to. We had a similar line of questioning by Sanger appertaining to Kristin and whether she was drunk, for example, asking about her stumbling through a doorway in one exchange, for example. "She was a tall, good-looking woman," Matt was asked. "Correct," he responded. "She was getting a lot of attention at the party, right?" Matt responded, "I don't recall her talking to many other guys that night, but I wasn't monitoring what she was doing." Again here, Sanger is trying, in my opinion, to create a narrative that other people could have been involved other than Paul. Misik on cross asks questions about whether he had spoken to other people who were going to testify since the prelim and about the case. Only about when they were scheduled to testify, he responded. Misik also asks if Kristin said she was cold, and Matt says she did not. Puvril on redirect said, "What did I ask you to do when we first spoke last spring?" And Matt responded, "Tell the truth." Puvril again asked, "How many times have I told you now?" And Matt responded, "A dozen." And the jurors laughed at that. That pretty much brings things up to date to the end of Wednesday. I'll provide a short update on Thursday and Friday's testimony over the weekend, or include it in a midweek update next week. So I'll see you next time for the continuation of the trial. I hope you found this update informative, and if you have, then please hit the like button. If you hit subscribe and then the notification bell, you won't miss out on updates and other videos when they're published. Bye for now.